Hey guys, Yogi Doug Johnson here, back with another Yin Yoga class. So this one is my double treble sequence, and this sequence works the hips and the spine. It stretches the four major myofascial groups in the legs, the hamstrings, the quads, hip flexors, the glutes, and the adductors. And then it also brings the spine through its articulations, so flexion, extension, rotation, and lateral flexion. So I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and comment if you have any questions below. Namaste. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin with a half butterfly pose to stretch the back of the thigh and the lower back. So we come into position and then just relax the upper body forward and down like so. A few things I want you to notice here is I am not grabbing my foot and pulling, and the reason I'm not doing that is potentially dangerous for our low back. So even though you may not feel much happening back here, just relax and let gravity do the work for you. Okay? If you do not feel the stretch in the back of the thigh, let me know and I'll be happy to teach you different posture that you can do to stretch the back of the thigh more intensely. Feel free to use props as needed, and a few ways to use them might be to support your body. So I can support my forearms with the blocks, my forehead, my left knee, and all of those will make the body feel more supported, so hopefully it can relax more completely. However, I do not want so much support that I no longer feel the stretch here. Okay, so that's how you know you've gone too far with the support. I can also use the bolster in a similar manner, laying here. Okay, but again, if I am all nice and comfy and I just feel oh so good and relaxed, but I don't feel any stretch, I am no longer doing Yin Yoga, and I am beginning to practice something called restorative yoga. Okay, so we're not doing restorative here today, we're doing Yin Yoga. Another thing you can try with the props is sitting on props, bolster, blanket, block, and that can help tilt you forward a little more aggressively, like so. Okay. My general recommendation with props and yin is if you don't need them, don't use them. Okay. So if there is a clear need, then by all means. But if you don't really feel you need it, usually it's just best to let gravity and your body interact naturally. Okay? We're about halfway through this first posture. At this point, it might be a good idea to check in, see if anything needs any adjusting. Just like with the props, I would encourage you, if you don't really feel anything needs adjusting, don't move. Just stay there. Marinate in that position. However, sometimes we find that after a few minutes, we can adjust and maybe go a little deeper. Or we find that maybe we were a little too deep to begin with, and we need to back off or back out a little bit. So pay attention and notice what you feel and how the pose changes minute by minute as you do it. As my teacher Paul Grilli, who basically created this style as we know it today, Yin Yoga, as he likes to say, a yin posture should feel and look different at the end of 5 minutes as it did at the beginning of 5 minutes. So it's natural for your experience to evolve as you hold the position, even though you may not actually consciously move your body at all. 1 minute left. So inhale, come on up, switch legs, and as you exhale, just allow yourself to come forward and down into this half butterfly pose on the second side. Please don't be surprised if what you're feeling on this side is very different than what you felt on the first side. Our bodies are not perfectly symmetrical, and so if we are paying attention and we have some body awareness, we're very likely to experience and feel differences on one side versus the other side. Whether or not you choose to approach the posture exactly the same way on both sides is a choice that you will have to make if the experience is pretty different. Generally, I encourage students to let what they feel guide them. Since our bodies are not perfectly symmetrical, regardless of what we want them to be or not, then we should try and honor and let the sensations that we feel, the tensions and the areas that feel stuck, we should let them guide us into how we approach the posture. So if for whatever reason I have very different hips on the left and the right side, which does happen, but it absolutely happens, where some people, if you look at their pelvis, one side is very different than the other. And so the muscles will respond and react to that. And we might feel more tension on one side of the body, or there might be tension in certain muscles on one side and not on the other side. So while it can be a very nice idea that by practicing symmetrically on both sides, our body will somehow become symmetrical, this is ignoring the fact that our body is already not symmetrical. And so what I would encourage you to do is address the particular tensions that you're feeling in your body. Don't worry about this ideal of being perfect and everything is symmetrical and the same on both sides. Again, it's a nice idea in theory, but in reality, we find that that's not necessarily what we experience in our body. Just a bit over 2 minutes left here. All right, now we come up and back into a rebound. Generally speaking, in a rebound, we want to allow the body to be still. We relax, close our eyes, and feel the inner currents of energy and sensation as they move through our body. The yogis referred to this energy as prana, and the Taoists as chi. Let's bring the legs in and give them a squeeze. And then to come to seated, we'll hinge. Hands under hips, extend the legs, lift the head and neck. If there's any pain in your back, bend your knees. Otherwise, legs straight. Take a deep breath. Exhale, lower the legs toward the ground. Just before they touch, pause. Inhale, legs up. And exhale, let the weight of the legs pull you up to seated. Okay, for this next pose, you may want to turn to face the long side of your mat. Take the legs straight and wide. Then turn toward your left leg. Reach down and hold the foot. And if you cannot, try using a strap over the foot. Now, I'm not asking you to yank or to pull yourself down, but rather to hold yourself in position. Once you're there, check in and see if you feel a stretch in the inside of the left thigh and the outside of the right waist. If you do, stay here. If you don't, then begin to stack or to roll your right shoulder over your left shoulder until you feel one or both of those areas. This stretch is for the hips. This is a muscle group called the adductors, also known as your groin muscles. This stretch is for your spine and torso. These are called your obliques, and we're bringing your spine into what's called lateral flexion. Once we're in position, again, there really isn't anything that we need to do except to be patient and to relax. I used the word earlier, marinate, in the pose, and that's a good way of thinking of the yin practice. If you're cooking something, say some tofu, and you want to marinate it, once you've put the tofu in the marinade, there's nothing more to be done but to wait. If you keep looking at it and picking the tofu up and moving it around and adding and subtracting things from the marinade, you will not get a good, tasty, marinated piece of tofu when you're done. You'll make a mess, you'll waste energy and time, and you'll possibly ruin the dish completely. Yin Yoga is much the same way. Again, occasionally, we need to make some changes. This is a little bit like perhaps making a marinade, putting the tofu in, and then realizing after a few minutes that you left an important ingredient out. So you might add that ingredient back in. So it is with yin postures. If after a little while in the pose we realize we're a little too far, not far enough, we need a prop, we should get rid of a prop, we need to adjust, this is perfectly fine. We're not
stuck in the first position that we come into. Intelligently using our awareness to be present in the posture and to make adjustments as necessary is an absolutely vital and essential part of practicing Yin Yoga. But intelligently, mindfully making adjustments as necessary is very different than fidgeting. Some students who come to Yin Yoga find it very challenging to hold the positions for the length of time that we do. And if you watch them, they're always moving, adjusting, coming in and out of the poses. This is different than not feeling safe. As always, you must check in each posture and make sure that what you're doing feels safe for your body to do. If you ever get the sense that it is not, by all means, come out of the pose immediately. However, what I'm speaking about has nothing to do with safety. Some students just can't sit still. It's not easy for them. Sometimes I hear students say, well, that's just the way that I am. Things like that. I can assure you that no one is just that way. If anyone were told that they would get $1 million if they could hold still for 5 minutes in a yoga pose, they would hold still. And if $1 million is not enough, then $1 billion or $100 billion. If we are relatively healthy and sane, we can hold still if we choose to. Let's switch sides. So once again, we are not trying to be rigid, dogmatic, hold ourselves still when we know that it would be better for us to switch position or change position. But we do want to be mindful of fidgeting, of unnecessary and often unconscious movements of the body. We also want to be aware if holding our body still is difficult for us. This is one of the reasons why we do the rebound. As long as we're doing postures, one might get the sense that a particular posture is the reason that they're moving, adjusting, fixing. So when we relax on our back comfortably and we remove the strain of doing a posture, we really no longer have any excuse or reason why we need to be moving. Once again, I find that certain students are simply unable to stay still, even in Shavasana, for more than a few seconds. What's important to understand is this doesn't make someone a bad person. That isn't what I'm trying to say. But it does mean that they're suffering from a certain kind of imbalance. Mental, emotional, psychological, energetic imbalance. Now again, since our culture doesn't encourage us to look at things this way, very often people identify with this state of imbalance. And they say things like, I just can't be still. That's just not who I am. Many of you know that I teach meditation, and I've had students, sometimes even yoga teachers, say to me, I simply can't meditate. It's just not for me. I'm a doer. I can't sit still. Well, it doesn't matter who we are. In reality, we all have two sides, a yin and a yang. Whoever we are, we need balance. We need movement and we need stillness. Saying, I can't sit still and meditate is a little bit like saying, I don't need to sleep. It's a little bit like saying, instead of sleeping, I'm going to go run a marathon every night. Well, I think we all know running a marathon is not a replacement for sleep. And constantly moving and doing and fixing is not a replacement for being still. If we are healthy and in balance, we are able to find stillness when it's needed, and we are able to be very active, strong, and resilient when it is needed. What we want to notice as yogis is, where are we deficient? Do I find myself tiring out and petering out when I'm being called on to be active and strong and to hold my ground? Or do I find myself fidgeting unnecessarily, getting uncomfortable in certain situations that require stillness and silence? This is a sign, again, of imbalance. This is not a personality trait. All right, let's unwind and we'll make our way back onto our back. Again, this is called the rebound. It is part of the practice, and it is an invitation to explore the very things that I was just speaking about: stillness and silence. I was saying to a fellow teacher today who I was speaking to at one of the studios I teach at, that I can turn any posture into torture, into a challenge. Doesn't matter what pose it is, shavasana, child pose. If I keep you there long enough, sooner or later you will begin to feel antsy, agitated, like you need to move. Now, we consider that normal and natural, and most of us don't think twice about it. But as yogis, we need to look a little deeper. We need to ask, why do I need to move? What is it that is impelling me to change something about my experience right now? And if we do this on a regular basis, we can learn so much about ourselves that no one else can really teach us. I can't teach you about your particular body and mind. All I can do is give you the techniques to uncover this understanding on your own. Stillness and silence are one of the most powerful techniques that I can teach. Let's bring the legs in now, give them a squeeze, shake it out, and when you're ready, hinge back up to seated. Let's transition to tabletop, and we'll do a little bit of the bear pose, also known as marauding bear. Moving the hips and torso and shoulders around, moving the head and neck, loosening everything up.
From there, as you feel that you're ready, you can tuck the toes and come up and back into a downward dog. Pedal the feet, stretch the legs, loosen up. From here, we transition into a very unusual pose called half seal pose. To do half seal, bring your left knee toward your left wrist. Sink the hips down and notice the left foot is alongside your left hip. We're targeting the front of the right hip, what are called the hip flexors. As we do this, we want to keep the torso up and back, as you'll see me doing here with the blocks. It's okay if you don't have blocks, that's fine, but try and press yourself back. The tendency is to want to do this. The problem with this is you are no longer stretching the hip flexors. The hip flexors extend from the front of your knee up the front of your thigh. They cross over the hip joint, run along the inside of your pelvis, and then attach to your lower spine, running all the way up to your lowest set of ribs. So they cover a quite large range of your body. This is why if I move my spine, I'm actually affecting the hip flexors. It's not just the hips that affect them. We're also bringing our spine into what's called hyperextension. Hyperextension is a fancy anatomical word for back bend. So you can see I have a curve in my low back as I push myself into this posture. My leg is in what's called hyperextension, which is when the leg is pulled back behind the pelvis. Both hyperextension in the leg and hyperextension in the spine are very good for us as modern people. With our modern chair-bound lifestyle, we don't generally get enough hyperextension in the leg, hip, and lower back. This is why a pose like this one can be so extremely therapeutic. There was a doctor who specialized in back pain, who worked in New Zealand, I believe it was. And he once had a patient who changed the way that he approached back pain and dealing with back pain. This patient came in complaining of pain in one leg and up his back on one side. The doctor was busy. Back pain is a fairly common problem for Western modern peoples like us. And so the patient was told to lay down in a waiting, or not a waiting room, but in a doctor's office on a bed, and the doctor would be with him soon. But because the doctor was very busy, it took him several minutes to see this patient. Now, most patients, when being asked to lay down in a bed, would likely lay down on their back. But this person, for whatever reason, laid down in what we would call a sphinx position in Yin Yoga. Sphinx is the gentler version of the seal pose. We're in what's called a half seal right now. To do full seal, we would just have both legs back behind us. But this would change the emphasis on the hip flexors, which is why we're doing half seal today. So this patient lay down on his belly, propped himself up on his elbows, and waited for the doctor. It took maybe 5 or 10, 15 minutes for the doctor to eventually arrive. And when he did, the patient reported that the pain was gone. So this gave the doctor pause. How could just laying on your belly in the Sphinx pose cure this back pain, that this person was in so much pain that they had to see a doctor? And sitting there for 5, 10, 15 minutes was enough to completely cure the problem. Let's switch sides. Well, like any good scientist or doctor, or I'll say yogi, he started to ask the question, what's going on here? And the conclusion he came to was that this gentleman who worked in an office and sat in a chair all day had his spine and hips in flexion for hours and hours and hours every day. This is the case for most modern peoples like us. Whether it is by choice or whether we are forced to do it, most of us spend way too many hours with our hips and our spine in what's called flexion, which is the opposite of what we're doing right now. As a result, our bodies experience imbalance. Physical, muscular imbalance, but also energetic, and we might say psychological, emotional, and even mental imbalance as well. So what this doctor concluded was, just by doing the Sphinx posture, this patient was able to cure themselves of their back pain. And it changed the way that this doctor approached back pain, thinking much more about, again, sort of reversing the effects of sitting in a chair all day as maybe the right way to approach healing or curing back pain. This is very much what we do in Yin Yoga, at least the way that I teach Yin. We are trying to mobilize our body and move it through its full range of motion, the hips and the low back. We don't do this in every single class. Some classes focus on the hips. Other classes focus on the spine. Still, other classes combine both, like today's class. And some classes focus more on energy centers or energy lines called meridians. But in general, in Yin Yoga, we are manipulating the muscles and joints and energy lines in the lower part of the body, the hips and the low back. Since these are the two areas that tend to suffer the most from sitting in a chair, Yin Yoga tends to be a very good antidote to this aspect of the modern lifestyle. I say this aspect because there are several things that we do as modern people that go against health. A good example of this is modern shoes. Just as a modern chair is a disaster for your hips and spine. And again, if you'd like to hear other people speak a little bit about this, then please check out the TED Talks that I posted on my Patreon page. Everything on my Patreon page right now is free for the taking. I, of course, greatly appreciate any support that's given. It's a lot of work to make the videos and find the content for that page. But right now I feel that it's more important to communicate freely with people and try and remove any barriers that might be there. So feel free to stop by and just peruse and look around and watch some videos, maybe learn something. But about 2 weeks ago, and for 3 weeks prior to that, I had posted TED Talks by people who were talking about the ills of sitting in a chair. And so again, if you don't think sitting in a chair is bad for you, you might check those out. Okay, let's go ahead and rebound. Coming onto your back, relaxing. Feel the effects of the half seal pose. I gave this sequence the name double trouble because the double part comes from we're working the hips and the spine. The trouble is it is a challenging sequence. Some people incorrectly think that Yin Yoga is supposed to be easy. I assure you, I studied Yin with Paul for many years. For 5 years, every year I'd go to California and study with him. And he never said Yin's supposed to be easy. So if you have the impression that Yin Yoga is always supposed to feel relaxing and be easy, then you're simply misinformed about the nature of the practice. It's not saying that Yin can't be relaxing or it can't be easy, but there's nothing inherent in Yin that dictates that it needs to be relaxing or easy. All right, let's bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze. Move around a little bit, leg cradle to release the effects of that last set. We finish with something that should be quite a bit easier, but still challenging in its own way. TTR, or twisted roots. Take your left knee, make sure you know which one's your left. Cross it over the right. You can lock ankles if you like, but you don't need to. And then drop the knees to the left, probably the opposite of the direction you intuitively wanted to go. This is the twisted roots, TTR for short. In twisted roots, the top leg, which is your left leg, is pulling the other leg, the right leg, or I should say the lower leg, the left leg, is hooked over the right leg, and it's pulling the right leg into what's called adduction. As we adduct that hip, we tend to stretch the muscles out here in the outside of the hip and maybe up into the waist. Combined with an effective arm position, we might get a diagonal stretch across the front of the chest as well. The spine, of course, is also twisting as my pelvis faces the left wall and my chest faces the ceiling. I can play around with the position of my knees. I can put support underneath them if I need it. I can support underneath my shoulder, again, if I need it. I can have my arm higher or lower, straight or bent, palm up, palm down. If there is tingling in this arm, then bring the arm into a different position
until you feel the tingling stop. That tingling is a nerve being pinched, and that's not a particularly good thing. Once again, once we're in position, there really is nothing more for us to do in terms of repositioning our body, unless at some point we feel that we need to do that. Once again, we always want to check in and make sure that what we're doing feels safe. If it doesn't, please contact me. Let me know. I'm happy to walk you through the steps to find an alternative to any of these postures that will agree with your body. This might take some time and experimentation, and that's okay, because once we learn what will work with our body, that tends to work for either a very, very long time, or it works forever, indefinitely. We're a little more than halfway. We have just a bit more than 2 minutes left here. So as I was saying before, sitting in a chair, and especially sitting for long periods of time, is a very unnatural thing for the human body. Another very unnatural thing for the human body is to walk on flat, hard surfaces wearing big boxy shoes. So the modern shoe is to the feet and the lower leg what the modern chair is to the hips and the low back. Now, in this class, there isn't much we can do for your lower leg and your feet. However, in Vinyasa, one of the points that I always try and do in a Vinyasa class is standing balance postures. Often several, but at least one. And part of the reason for this is what I'm trying to do in that class is undo some of the poor, bad side effects of the modern shoe. Now you might say, well, I go barefoot at home. But it's not just about being barefoot. It's also about being on a flat, smooth surface all the time. The human body is an amazing thing, and it was designed to be able to move over all different kinds of terrain and all different kinds of surfaces. Let's switch sides. Right knee over left, down to the right. Twisted, twisted roots. So what we're learning is not only can the human body move over a variety of surfaces and terrain, but that when it doesn't, it often suffers as a result. Parts of the body become weak, inept, frail. Parts of our brain do not get stimulated as they are meant to. Parts of our nervous system do not get used. And as we begin to get a little older, we find that we are no longer able to effectively balance our body very well. This is one thing that students very often mention to me in vinyasa class, is how poorly they can balance their body. Now again, in our culture, we've been led to believe that this is to be expected and it's normal. That as we age, we're going to end up with a walker, in a motorized scooter at some point. It doesn't really matter, it's inevitable. But this flies in the face of what we find in tribal cultures. In tribal cultures, people often live to be the same age that people in our own culture live to be. This is in contrast to agricultural societies. So often in tribal cultures and in modern cultures, the lifespan of a human being is the same. Infant mortality is a different issue, and often infant mortality drags down the average lifespan of a tribal person because many infants or babies die. But what I read is once you're above the age of 5, if you live in a tribe, you're very likely to reach 70, 80, 90. Now, when you understand about tribal peoples, generally tribal peoples are nomadic, which means they don't stay in one place forever. They don't have houses or possessions really, only what they can carry on their back, or if they live with camels or horses, maybe what they could put on the back of a camel or a horse. Generally speaking though, tribal peoples walk when they move to a new location. What this means, if you're elderly and you cannot walk, you're basically finished. You become a drag on the tribe. You slow them down. People have to try and carry you or help you along. And so, in these cultures, people age very, very well. They continue moving and using their brains and their bodies throughout their whole life and are able to keep up well into old age. So this is where we have to question the modern narrative that starting in our 40s, and some people even think earlier than that, your body just basically begins to fall apart. Now granted, there are changes in your body. I'm in my late 40s now, and definitely I've noticed my eyesight is not what it once was. I have pains in my body where I didn't used to. All kinds of changes. But the worst thing that I can do, noticing these changes, is to then start to enable those changes. Again, in a tribal culture, in a natural human environment, I would not be able to enable those things by getting a walker or getting special kinds of shoes or whatever it is to make my life easier. I would simply have to work harder to overcome any deficiencies in my body. Otherwise, again, I basically die. Now that might sound very harsh, but what we're finding is that effort to overcome the deficiencies actually makes the body healthier, stronger, more resilient, and younger. All right, let's unwind. Unwind, come back onto your back, and just relax for a few moments. Again, that's the rebound. All right, bring the legs in and give them a nice squeeze. You might rock side to side, forward and back. And then as you're ready, unwind onto your back. Come into Shavasana, or as we call it in Yin, pentacle pose. Relaxing on your back, allow your legs and arms to splay apart comfortably. Palms up, head centered, chin tucked in slightly, and eyes closed. And then for the next 6 minutes or so, you can set a timer, try and allow your body to remain still. What I hope you take away from today's class and the talk that I gave during the class is whether it's stillness or, again, forcing our body to do certain things that might be very difficult or challenging for it. We don't want to run away or shy away from that which is challenging or difficult or makes us uncomfortable. When we live our life that way, it makes our life very small and limited. It makes our comfort zone very small. And it actually makes us less healthy as individuals. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you got a lot from the class, and I hope to see you next time. Namaste. Hey guys, so I hope you enjoyed that class. Please remember to like, subscribe, and if you have any questions about anything, leave them in the comments below. Namaste.